can see all the participants right now. I see Ben Wolcott from ODE is on. I also want to flag for everybody that as we are going through today's webinar, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat because I have team members who will answer your questions in the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. And open up the portal and hide this. Okay, so today we are going to go over TIDE, which is the registration system for users who will access all CAI systems, and the registration system for students who will take any of the OSAS tests. So in order for any person to act as a test administrator, they have to be in TIDE, and any student who needs to take any test at all also needs to be in TIDE. So I'll show you how to first access TIDE. And you should all be familiar with the osasportal.org website. That's where you can find out information about everything having to do with assessments. And I'll show you how to get to TIDE. You would first go to users, and you could go to test administrator or test coordinator. And you scroll down, and in the section preparing for testing, you'll see the TIDE card. So you would press on that. So before we go into TIDE, I just want to also show you here that on the portal, there is a resources button. And if you type TIDE user guide in here, you'll find the TIDE user guide. And that is a standalone document that provides all the information you could possibly need for about the TIDE system. So that's a really handy document to have at your fingertips while you're working in TIDE. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go back to TIDE and log in. And by the way, sorry I didn't introduce myself. My name is Olivia Padilla, and I work for Cambium Assessment. We're the vendor who provides the software for the statewide testing system. Okay, so we'll go ahead and press TIDE. And here's your login screen. If you have not yet logged in for the year and you did have an account in the past, you would press this button here, request a new password for this school year. If you had never been in TIDE before, you would need to request that ODE or your ESD partner adds you to TIDE, and you'll get an email, and that'll send you to a page that looks like this where you set up your password, and you'll set up your password. And just a word in advance, probably it won't happen for me right here, right now, but we do have an authentication setting turned on for TIDE, so that your first time logging in for the year, or your first time on a web browser, or if you've refreshed your cache, it'll ask you to put in an authentication code. And what it does is sends an authentication code to your email just to make sure it's you, because the information in the system is private student information. So it's just an extra security check. So you would just hit login here. And then some of you are DTCs for multiple districts. So when you work in TIDE, you can only work in one district at a time. So you would need to select most of you are DTCs who would only have DTC as the role available here for you. And then you would select the district that you want to work inside during that session. And press submit. And then you get the TIDE landing page. And I'll start here by going over what you see on this page now. So you'll see up here on the left-hand side of the screen is what we call the system switcher. And that has links to the other pieces of software that we provide for ODE. So we have the centralized reporting system, which is the new system that replaced the online reporting system. So that's where you get student results. The TA training site is the practice test administrator site, the regular TA interface, which is for summative and interim assessments, and then the remote proctoring TA certification, which I will talk about a little bit later. Under general resources, you'll find a button that's role definition, which when you are adding new users, you might want to take a look at this because it describes the different levels of access into our systems that are provided with the roles that you can add. We also have a link here to accessibility supports, which links to the ODE OAM, which is the Oregon Accessibility Manual. And then we have the science interim scoring guides, which provide scoring information for the science interims, which are now available statewide. We have a help button, which is a link to the online, I'm gonna have to allow pop-ups here. This is the online TIDE user guide, and it will always open to the page that you have open on your screen. So I just was on the landing page, so it opens to the introduction, but if we're inside the test windows module, it will open up to the test windows page of the user guide. So this is really handy. It has like a little menu too, so it's a nice, easy thing to use. And under manage account, you can change, it says change role, but this is where if you have multiple associations, you can change the district that you are associated with to one of the other districts. You can update your contact information. Just a note about TIDE. If you have to add your phone number, you can do that here. If you have a name change, but you had, you're keeping your same email, that's fine. But if your email does change, you have to have someone at a higher level delete out your account, and you have to have yourself re-added back in with your new email. So the email is one of the key login credentials. And so we don't allow email changes. You have to delete out the account and create a new one. And you can also reset your password. And then just a word is that because this system does include personally identifiable information, we do want you to make sure that when you're done working in the system that you press the log out button. Okay, and then the one thing I skipped over here is the inbox, which is like, it's a secure inbox, which allows you to download reports from inside our systems, and you can send the files to other folks within the system who are also in TIDE. If, for example, you have a student record of a student who left your district and went to a different district, you can send information to the other DTC via this inbox, which that's really handy. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started here with the different modules. So just to show you a little bit about how navigation works here, these sections here, like user information, student information, are what we call modules. And once you are inside a module, you can use several different buttons at the top of the screen to help yourself navigate through TIDE. You can always press the home button to take you back to home. And these buttons here, the orange one for preparing for testing, will then give you the menu with the modules that are in the preparing for testing section. And if you press administering tests, you'll see then the green opens and that'll show you the module that's available under administering tests. So as you start this year, I want to give you a little background. In many years leading up to last year, the 2019-2020 school year, when we did the annual, what we call a rollover, a system rollover from one school year to the next school year, we used to purge all users out of Tide. So in 2019-2020, we stopped doing that and we left users inside Tide. So the first step every year should be for DTCs that you go in and you look at the users that are associated with your district and Tide. So you would go to view, edit, export users, and you would want to search all roles. And I would just press a search here and you'll find the results. And this screen here is what all of our search results screens look like. It'll become a familiar feeling table. And there's a couple things you can do here. One is that if you're in a small district and you don't have that many users, you could just kind of look down this list. And if you notice anybody who you know has left the district and is no longer employed, you could just press these little buttons next to their account and you could delete those users out immediately that way. If you have a much bigger district with many more users, another option is that you could export this entire search result into Excel. So you would come up here and you could export all to Excel, and then you could download, you can open and save the file and then open it and work within that file. And so you would identify who needs to be deleted for the year. So that would be a best practice for all DTCs when you're first getting into Tide this year, to make sure first that you delete out any users that should not have access to the system.
Olivia, I'm going to pause real quick on this one. I see one question in particular with the chat from Janet. And so just two updates. The one reason that we do the rollover is that we know that there are educators who need access to the ELPA screener right away at the beginning of the school year. So that's one of the reasons behind the rollover process that we have. A second reason why we do the rollover process with test administrator accounts is if there are trained users from the year prior who would like to start utilizing the interim assessment components, there's only one small step that they have to do that we've talked about during DTC trainings in order to have access to the interim assessment system at the beginning of the school year. So that's that. I wanted to explain why we have the rollover in place. The question that came up is, what if we have users listed from ODE that do not work for the district? About 2 years ago, prior to the pandemic, right? I guess that's the disclaimer for everything. We added our school improvement team who needed access to data that was more granular than just what is reported on like the state report cards. They wanted to come in and be able to look at districts' claim level scores so that they could provide guidance and support as our school improvement team was supporting districts. So what ODE did is we added a few users. If at this time we have told everyone, go ahead and remove those ODE personnel. If they are appearing, go ahead and remove all ODE personnel who would be in your download district list, that we now have a different pathway for them to get into the system. So great question. I'm glad you asked that because I've answered that email probably, I don't know, a dozen times already this year. So Olivia, thanks for the break.
No problem. And please feel free to continue to jump in if because I don't have the chat screen open on my page, so I'm not seeing the questions that come in. But please feel free to jump in and our team will try to answer the questions coming in via the chat, and then we will have like Q&A session at the end too, where I can take open questions as well.
And just one more clarification. If the previous DTC has already cleared out test administrator accounts, if you're a new DTC, again, disclaimer, because of the pandemic, you may not have trained test administrators to be in the system because we did pause summative assessment in, I guess this is 2019-20, and then we did it again. We had a limited test administration for 2020-21. It is possible that when you go in, there might not be any test administrator accounts because there were no users from last year to roll over in the system. So don't be alarmed if you see that as well. But there was a chat on that one too. Thanks again, Olivia.
Okay, yeah, I'll go over adding users here in a second. So, okay, thanks for that, Tony. Okay, so you can see what you can do here with the search results, and then I'm going to actually open a user account. So to open an individual user account, you would click on the pencil, and this opens up the individual user account. So you can see here that the email is not editable because, as I mentioned before, that's a key login credential, and those cannot be edited. If you have a changed email, the person needs to have their account deleted, and then they need to be added back in with their updated email. A couple other things I want to talk about on this page is test group. So one thing that Tony had mentioned was that there's an extra step that DTCs need to take in order to make an individual eligible to act as a TA. And that step is that a test group has to be assigned for them. So when we do the rollover every year for the school year, we wipe out the values in this field except for ALPA screener. So if someone had previously been having test group permissions for ALPA screener, then those will persist from year to year. But for interim and summative test groups, so that means any tests that fall in the interim category or any tests that are summative tests, so summative ALPA, summative ELA and math, science, those are considered summative tests. Every year, folks need to receive their required training before they get the interim or summative test group permission. So that has to be set and tied before they're able to start a test session for those tests. Seed survey does not require any test group. So TAs or automatically have permission to administer the seed survey. Another thing here is the remote proctoring certification. This was new last spring, and you'll be hearing more about it in upcoming communications from ODE. But what this is an additional certification that is given once a TA has completed the TA certification course, and this field updates automatically when a TA has completed the course. So I'll show you real quick where that course is. I had mentioned earlier I would come back to it, but in the system switcher up here, you see remote proctoring TA certification. So if you click on this, another window will open, and I've already completed the course. So your TAs who will be administering tests remotely. So this year we'll be offering summative tests for remote administration. And in order to act as a TA for those types of administrations, they have to take this course. So once they complete this course, it's about 40 minutes long. They'll automatically get the permission. Well, let me close out of this or go back here. They'll automatically get the permission and tied for remote proctoring certification. And that button will be flipped from a no to a yes. So again, that's only required if you're going to be offering remote tests in your district. Not all districts are going to be offering that, so make sure you talk with your team and make sure it's clear on what type of whether in-person or remote proctoring is going to be used in your district.
I'm going to jump in again on this one real quick. ODE is in the middle of working with Cambium on all of the technical requirements for remote administration, and we will be publishing guidance, policy, test administration guidance, and set up for students as well as districts and the test administrator. So we realize there's lots of questions right now around the remote administration function, and we are working to get all of that communicated out. And so look for that in December and going into January as well. And I'm actually answering a response to that email as well. So stay tuned. We do have more information coming on the remote administration functions.
Thanks, Tony. Okay. So if you need to add a user to your district, you would press the add users button and you can input their email and add a user one at a time this way, or you can use the upload users template. And this will become a familiar screen for you as well, because all of our upload modules look just like this, where you have a field where it asks you to browse and choose a file to upload, and the templates are always in the upper right hand side of the screen like this. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. So here, if you needed to add a bunch of users, you would add them in with their role. And you would add in your district ID, which is 4 digits, your school ID, which is 8 digits. It's the 4 district plus your school ID. The user's email, first and last name. You don't have to enter the phone number, but test group, that would be that field that we had discussed where you want to put in which trainings has that TA completed and which tests should they be able to proctor, and then the action would be add. And then if you wanted to just remove someone, you could put in this information and then you would choose like the delete and delete out the user if they're no longer in your district. And then I'll show you what it looks like when you upload a file here. Let's see. I'm not sure if that one has anything in it. Oop. I think I had an empty file here. Or I can't find my, oh, here we go. User examples upload, that would be it. So once you hit next, it shows you the contents of your upload file. And then once you hit next again, you'll see a page that shows validation errors. And so it'll flag for you the information that is incorrectly formatted or inappropriate for that field. And so you can either choose to continue with the upload as is, and what that will do is upload any valid records, but exclude invalid records. Or you could hit upload revised file and it'll just take you to this page where you browse and you fix your file and browse and upload the file that has had the fixes applied to it. So you'll always get this type of validation page before you complete an upload in our system. Okay, so I think I've covered everything under users. So I'm going to move on to student information. So to start off with, we'll talk about adding student temp IDs. So for ELPA screener, In the summers, we understand that many districts have open enrollment periods where families show up at your district offices and want to enroll their students for the first time. And sometimes you decide to administer the ALPA screener, and sometimes the Oregon student ID system isn't able to process and create an SSID on the spot. However, you wish to administer the ALPA screener on the spot. So in order to support the need for an ID to log in to the ALPA screener, which is required for any student to log into a test, they have to put in an ID and their first name. So what this does here is creates an ID, a temp ID, that they can use to take the ALPA screener until their regular SSID becomes available. So you would enter in the district information, the school information, student's first and last name, date of birth, enrolled grade, and then if this is important to you, make sure you enter it, the district local student ID number, and also make sure you enter it correctly, because just this field is not editable once you have saved it. So make sure that you know, this information is QC'd carefully before you save it. I also want to point out that if you are administering the ALPA screener at a central district location, make sure that you're using your best guess when it comes to the school that the student will be enrolled in, because if you ever want to merge the temp ID with the SSID, the schools have to match. So make sure to use the school name that you think that student will actually go to. Don't use like the district central code, because if you want to merge them, they have to match. So you'll save all this information in here, and once you do so, I'll show you what happens. And you just press save. Oh, I already exist. So let me create a. Okay, so it'll give you a temp ID, and this is the ID that you would use for the ALPA screener for the login. And then down here below, you can save any kind of accessibility support that that student may need for their ALPA screener test. So if that student, for example, if the parent said, you know, the student didn't have glasses yet and they needed to have a larger print size, and you know, you followed all of the procedures for, you know, logging accessibility supports, you could make the print size larger here. Or if I'm not sure the exact process for ALPA screener domain exemptions, but if they needed one for the ALPA screener, you would enter that here and you would press save. Just a note that for domain exemptions or anything in this section called accommodations, that when you enter in an accommodation, you also need to enter in the accommodation flag as one or more. The reason is that that's a tracking mechanism that we use so that ODE can report the use of these accommodations in their federal reporting requirements. So make sure you press that. And I didn't enter in it. I entered this in on a blank account. So, okay, moving on. Going to show you edit export students. So this search screen allows you to search all the student records that you have uploaded into Tide. So this tells you what's in Tide. So you would just enter in, you can do it by school. or you can select all schools in your district. You can choose either temp ID or SSID. So if you wanted, someone asked how many temp IDs had you created for the ELPA screeners that you administered this year, you could search for just temp IDs and that could return that. Or you can just search for everything. You can search for an actual individual student using the first or last name. And then you can choose one or more grades or all grades. And then you could search by a district local school ID number. And then we also offer an advanced search where you can search by a student's information, whether it is their English learner status or their setting on a particular accessibility support. So this comes in handy if you're preparing for tests and you are wanting to set up the test lab and you need to know how many headsets you might need. You could come in here and look at text to speech, and you could just look for all students who you'll be testing ELA, and so you want to look for students who you know are going to be using TTS. That means they're going to need a headset. So you could add and search by those criteria, and you would press search. So you can see there's 34 kids who would need it. So you would search by, which session they would be in. Maybe you would want to put them all together so they would all have their headsets on at once, or if you only have 10 headsets, so you put them in 4 different sessions. So that's helpful. So now we're back at the familiar search results table, where instead of users, we have students in here. And you can see that all of the relevant information about these individuals is here in this table, and this table is quite large. And you can scroll to the right and you'll see these are the different designated support test settings that the student would have, and their accommodations, and then their test access. So from this page, you're not able to delete students. So I'm not sure if districts are aware of how the student data for regular SSID accounts gets into TIDE, but what happens is that you enter the information about students in the Oregon Student Information System, and then on a nightly basis, our Cambium imports those records into TIDE. So anything information that's in here about a student, like an SSID, their name, their date of birth, their enrolled grade, that is not entered through TIDE. That's entered through the Oregon Student Information System, and that can be edited in that system. And then on a nightly basis, we get the data imported, and then any updates will take 24 hours to take in the system. So for that reason, we cannot delete any students out of TIDE here. If you needed to delete a student or make a record change, you would do that in the Oregon student system, and then we would get the change overnight here. But what you can do is you can export all of these files to Excel. You can also print pre-ID labels. This was something that was popular when we had the kindergarten assessment, but essentially what happens is that you can just put some like a label page into a printer, and if you have hard copies and you need like the student's name and district information on a hard copy of something, it will create labels here. You can also print out student test settings and tools. And this is helpful if you have like if you are organizing the test sessions for your school and you have someone like an IT coordinator who's going to be running the test lab, but they have like a TT role and they haven't received all the trainings to set the settings. What you could do is do a printout like this and give it to that IT person, and they could just make sure that as they're approving students, that all of the supports that are on this test setting and tools page match the test settings that are coming in to be approved for that session. So that's helpful too. You can change some student information from starting at this screen. So you would press the pencil, which gets you into an individual user account. And here you're able to do a couple different things. First, you can set block subjects. So if a student's parents opted them out of testing, you could set the block subjects here, and it's by subject. Target up, I believe, is handled at the ESD level. So you could verify a target up setting, and I believe you do need to contact your ESD partner to set target up. You can set designated supports based on the student's IEP, or if you know if it's a preference of them to have a larger print size. Some of these designated supports like Spanish on a math test, those can be set here. And then the accommodations, as I had mentioned before, those can also be set here. Those need to be in the IEP or the 504 plan. And you always have to switch the flag here for one or more whenever you're setting an exemption. You would save it. And you'll get this little error if you don't have the accommodation flag set. So make sure that before you close out of this screen that you don't have that error. You just save. And there it's giving me another one here. So it'll give you a save confirmation. So that's a lot of work to do one by one. So we do have a upload student test settings and tools. So you would go to that. This is the familiar page, the upload page. You would go to your Excel template. And this template is very straightforward. You put in the SSID of the student, the subject, and it gives you a drop down. And then once you select the subject, it'll give you the list of available test tools and values. And you have to do one row per test per setting. So if that student needed masking to be on for ALPA summative and math, you would just copy and you would add in that student's ID 3 times. Like that. So that needs to be one row per test per setting. And then once you have this set up, you can just upload it through that same feature here. So you can also upload student test restrictions. So that is the same. We looked at block subjects when you're setting it one by one in that student record. You can also set, these are like the parent opt-outs. You can set them here, and it's literally just the SSID subject and then whether yes or no for a block subject. And then you can also update temp ID to SSID. So this was if you have temp IDs that you created for the ALPA screener and you want to move that record from the temp ID to the SSID, you can do that. Just a reminder that in order for that merge to work, there's a couple things that have to match. The or the institution has to match identically. So they can't be in Crater Lake School and then Medford School. That merge won't work. Even if they're in the same district, they have to be, both records have to be in Crater Lake School. The date of birth has to be the same exactly. And then we require what we call a fuzzy match on first and last name. So it has to be within like 1 or 2 characters in order for the merge to happen. And you will get validation errors if there is a mismatch. But you can update. That's if you want the record for the ALPA screener to appear under the SSID account when the student originally took it using a temp ID. And then just one more thing, for the OPA screener, make sure that when folks are administering the test using a temp ID, that you're sure what grade that student should be tested in. We do see a couple of issues where someone will try to do this merge and the student temp ID had been, for example, in grade 1, and then the SSID is in grade 2 or 3, and it's not the same OPA screener test. So we get errors then. So just be pretty sure when you're administering OPA screener, especially above kindergarten, pre-K, that you're administering the right test under the temp ID. Okay, we're gonna move on to rosters. Rosters are really helpful for reporting, and they're a way to group students together within your district so that you can look at their aggregate scores.
Olivia, I'm gonna pause you here for a second. I cannot stress what Olivia just said about the importance of doing rosters for reporting. One of the things we hear back from educators many times is that they cannot find their students by their class or their class periods. And the interim assessment system, it is key to have rosters established so that teacher A can access interim assessment data that is specific to them. So I cannot stress the importance of what Olivia is about to share. And as a former administrator and school improvement specialist, we always had rosters for our teachers so that they could go into the system and look at their summative assessment data as soon as it was made available in the centralized reporting system. So Olivia, I apologize for the interruption, but it is super important to educators in having access to their data in both the summative and the interim assessment system. So apologies again, Olivia.
No, don't apologize. I'm happy to have the extra information. It's good. Okay. So yes, rosters are handy, especially if, for example, you have 4 periods of science students in 8th grade, and you want to compare how each of those classes is doing on certain science topics. You can set up those rosters, and then you will be able to easily click some buttons in the reporting system and look at and compare the scores in those different classes. So here, I just pressed on view, edit, export. So you would put in your district and you can choose the school. This button doesn't do anything. It will always be a user defined roster. And then you would hit search and you could see the rosters that were already set up. So you can see here that there's 3 rosters. I think I created this one, science grade 5, class 1. So it shows that the grade over here and the number of students in the roster. So I'm just going to click on this pencil, which opens the actual roster account. And you can see down here that this is the way that you add and remove students from a roster. I'll go back to create rosters in a minute, but essentially this is where you in the create rosters module, you see a field to enter in the roster name. You can associate a teacher if you want. You don't have to have one included. And then these students were added last time. But if you want to add more students, what you would do is you could just do a search for students. And let's say you have grade 4 students in that that you want to include in this particular roster. You would search. Sorry, I might have, okay. And then it'll give you some students who are in 4th grade who perhaps they are part of the grade. It's a multi-grade type school. So you want to include them in the roster. You press the plus and they get moved over into the roster list here. And then you could add all and move them all over there. And then you would save. And so now those students who are all in that same class, they're multiple grades, but they're all in what you're calling the grade 5 science class, they're grouped together in this roster, and this roster will be available for you in the reporting system to run aggregate reports to see how that group of students is doing together. So I just showed you how to like view and edit a roster. I think I might skip adding a roster just because we're getting short on time here. But essentially, yeah, you select your district, school, and enrolled grade, and you can search for students, and then you would name the roster, and you can add a teacher, and then you would just add the students into that roster and save it. So as Tony said, that's super helpful for working with your interim data. So, and you can also upload rosters if that's faster for you. If you just want to do uploads, they ask you to name the roster and then add SSIDs. It's very straightforward. Okay, we're going to move on to test windows. So test windows are really helpful because they allow you to prevent TAs from administering tests when you don't want them to. So if you don't want anyone testing students on ELA or math until after April 1st, you can stop them from doing that by setting a test window. I do know that there are some thresholds of curriculum coverage that are required before you actually test in some subjects. So this would be a way for you to ensure that you don't have any early testing going on. So you would say, so you would come in here, you can set the test windows at either the district or the school level. But let's say you don't want anyone to test grade 5 science until April 1st. So you would just say grade 5 science, and you would set it at the district level. And you would set it to April 1st. Or let's say there's any reason, it could not be curriculum coverage, but maybe it had to do with your training schedules or just your testing schedules and getting software on computers. So this is just a way for you to manage blocking early testing. And then you would set this to the end of the testing window or whenever date you wanted to end testing, wrap it up May 27th, maybe. And then you have a list here of all of the available tests that could be included in a test window. So because we're talking about grade 5 science, you would find the grade 5 science IDs or test names. I'm sorry, there's many in here because we have all of the interim tests in this list as well. I'm sure science is going to be at the bottom somewhere. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I did this before. Those aren't in here quite yet because we don't have the summative window open yet. So I'm just going to use here the interim test, for example. And you would add selected. So let's say those were science, grade 5 science tests. You would add that in there and then you could save that. And then make sure when you are adding test windows that you communicate those out to your schools and teachers, because sometimes folks will not know about the test windows and go in and try to administer some tests, and they panic because they go into the TA interface and they don't see the test available. That's what happens when you set a test window to not start until later. When a TA goes in to start a test session, those tests will not be available in the TA interface to start a session with those tests. So just make sure you communicate out to your district and the schools that you've set this window and you don't want anyone testing before a certain date. And you can also provide uploads to set test windows as well. was pretty straightforward with that same sort of familiar upload page, and the template for it is right here. And the Tide user guide provides all of the information about the acceptable values for these upload templates. Okay, and then finally, just the last section is for once you've started testing, we have a monitoring test progress module, and there's a couple different options here. And plan and manage testing is one that is most often used. And what this does is allows you to choose the assessment and then provide yourself with an update on how many students have completed the tests. And this helps you figure out pacing for, how many test sessions that you want to add in a given week, or if you need to reach out to schools and remind school test coordinators to administer certain tests in a certain week, you can monitor the progress here. So you would choose your district and school, and then you can also do advanced searches here by how many students with Braille took their science test or something like that. But then the real useful piece here is look at students who have, or these radio buttons here. So you would look at students who have completed a certain opportunity. You can look at if you got a report of a TA who may have been not following procedure, you can look up which students who tested under that TA in a certain time or under a certain session ID. You could, if you want to make sure you don't have to file reopen requests with ODE, like impropriety requests, because you had tests expired and the student is available and wants to finish testing, you could use this radio button. Students whose current opportunity will expire in like between, you could say 1 and 7 days, and that would tell you how many students tests are expiring in the next week, and you could follow up with the STC and make sure, hey, these kids in your school have tests expiring, make sure they get back in and finish their test in the next week. You can also use this button here. Students on there, you could just leave it any opportunity, have a status of paused, and you could run that in the Monday of the last week of testing, and just follow up with folks and make sure that these students who have paused tests finish up their test. And then you can look for student records one by one here. So this is really helpful. And then you'll get the familiar search results report and information about the test and the grade. And that'll help you follow up on those tests. You can, if you have like a whole list of SSIDs and you just want to look at their participation across the board, you can enter those here, or you can just drop the SSIDs in this upload, using this upload feature here, and just see, let's say you have a kid who's transferring schools and you want to see which tests they've already taken, you can drop their SSID in here, and you'll get a report of all the tests they've taken when you put them in here. And then finally, test completion rates. This is really helpful. So if one thing I like to show here is the, if you look at institution test completion rates, you can run that for your whole district, and you can select all schools. And then you can see a report that shows you the rates for each of the schools in your district. So if you set a goal of, let's say, 85, 90% test completion rates for the year, this report will give you the information by school of their test completion rate. It'll show the total students who are eligible in Tide, the total students who have started and completed tests, and then the percentages. So that's super helpful, and it'll break it down by institution name, so by school, and by test. So this is a very helpful report. And then Finally, the test status code report. This is a helpful report because it shows, it's a very thorough report. It shows every student in your district, every test they're eligible for, and the status of that opportunity, whether it's even started at all, which it would be empty if it hasn't started, and then, or whether it's been reported. So this is kind of like a census of all possible tests that could be taken in your district and where they stand. That's a very helpful report. That will be a big report for you. And I think that gets to the end. And I know we're trying to wrap up a little early today because there's another meeting right after this. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. Does anybody have any questions they want to jump in and ask?
There we go. I
Oh,
think
go ahead, Tony.
I think we got most of the questions answered in the chat. Okay. And what I'd probably request is if we missed a question that was either sent to the whole group, I know some of you were sending direct messages to myself, Kathy, as well. So if there's a question that we missed, if you could put it back in the chat, copy and paste it in there. We just want to make sure that we did get to everybody's question. If you have a new question, again, the chat is usually easiest for us to continue to track on there. And then I don't know if Ben Wolcott is still on, but if Ben, if you are still on, you had a chat reply at 3:39 about temp IDs for unique screening that I thought was important to repeat again if you're available and you're still online.
I'm still here. I can put voice to the chat if that is helpful. So at the time of this 3:39 chat, we were talking about uploading temp IDs to merge with SSIDs. It's not called that in TIDE. It's called upload temp ID to SSID, I believe.
Update, yeah.
Update, thank you. So what I put in the chat is that this is only for standard screening. You should never use this function with unique screening. If you do, it will potentially overwrite previous screeners and it will make it look like the student is perhaps more newly arrived than they really are, or it will leave confusing data in the pool for later users who want to figure out what the student's ELP testing history is. So unique screening is always performed via temp ID. Just leave it in the temp ID and let those temp IDs sit on the shelf for ever and ever.
Thank you. And sorry, I didn't go over that when we first went over there.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. I kind of missed the context, so I was hoping that you're on there. Ben, I know you need to go ahead and jump to the other meeting that is about to happen. Joanne, we're about to do our new DTC training webinar. And so I see your question about the importance of the interim assessment system, the interim assessment reports. The first 25 minutes of our DTC webinar meeting that's about to launch here from 4 to 5 addresses exactly this topic. We kind of do an overview of what the interim assessment system is, how educators can use it, how schools and districts can use it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to post the new DTC Zoom link. And again, this is going to start here at 4 o'clock in one more minute. And then John, what is the typical time frame that reporting happens from the end of the test window? There is the hand scoring components that are included in the performance task. And so we normally have all of those scored within 10 business days. So if a student finishes their assessment, usually within 10 business days, their preliminary or unofficial scores are available in the centralized reporting system. Again, ODE does go through a validation process that we have to conduct. So the official ODE scores are published usually in fall, but we do have preliminary or the unofficial scores that are available in the centralized reporting system. And so I hope that kind of gets to your question. It's more dependent on when students finish their assessment. Olivia, please clarify if I'm mistaken on that time frame.
The time frame for when their scores will show up in CRS?
Correct.
For interims, you know, it depends on if there's hand scored items that have to be scored locally. But as soon as a student submits their test, either the score will be immediately available, or the hand scoring option will be available to the TA in CRS.
And for summatives, is it usually that 10-day after a
Yeah,
student
so
finishes?
summative-
Summative is usually
right.
10 days after.
Right. Yep.
Okay. I do apologize. I cannot thank you enough. If you want to attend the new DTC web training, I would say click on that Zoom link. And I saw Noelle just jumped over. Ben is about to jump over. Thank you, Cambium team. And everybody have a great evening, great week if we don't see you.
Bye.